Today, I want to do a few readings and an exercise in a concept that I found out about today from this paper by Dave Snowden, who's a complexity theorist, it's called Abduction, and it's about sort of linking together different kinds of ideas. And I'm going to incorporate some ideas around abduction, linking ideas together, these nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, which is something I briefly mentioned and came up in the comments the other day, and how that relates to information processing in sleep states. And then I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about flow from Stealing Fire, the Stealing Fire book, and about unconscious information processing, and then move on to, I found some information that's about 10 years old from John Boyk that he was doing work in, or he was presenting his research at least in Texas at a Python conference in Python computing in 2014, and it was about flow states in community currencies. It was a program called LIDA and these principled societies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to close out with Patry Friedman and the network state and Seasteading, and we'll see if we can see how these things are all connected together. Okay, so to start out with, I'm going to read the section, a section in this paper that Steffers brought to my attention today. We were revisiting Dave Snowden, and it's called As Through a Glass Darkly, a Complex Systems Approach to Futures. And I think this is part of a larger edited volume. And so let me get to the point about abduction. Here it's section 5.1.2 in this paper. I'm going to move this over here. Okay, so this is just a couple paragraphs I want to share. Abduction. Humans are very good at abductive logic and less good at inductive, where machine learning can be more effective. Sometimes known as the logic of hunches, the American pragmatists saw abduction as hypothesis generation. Bateson, 2021, sees it as idea generation through the use of metaphor. Within naturalizing sense-making, it is the use of abstraction to allow novel connections to be made between apparently unconnected things. And that's going to relate a little bit to what I'm going to talk about in the Jamie Wheel, Stephen Kotler, Stealing Fire book. This abstraction is this idea of getting out of your own mind and having some distance to consider things outside of sort of your ego-grounded space. So they talk a lot about how to get out of your mind in this book. Okay, so back to Snowden. Within naturalizing sense-making, it is the use of abstraction to allow novel connections to be made between apparently unconnected things. So that's when I feel like that's part of my operating system. Abduction is key to the process of exaptation described in the next section. Abstraction, including art, and this connects to an individual, Roy Ascott, I believe, that Steffers brought to my attention, and he has this whole thing about moist media, and I think we can imagine, if we think about distributed intelligence and crowdsourcing as maybe in the early stages being public-facing as citizen science participation and STEM, right, like civic STEM work, then we stick the A in the middle for art and make it STEAM, because then the art gives us abstractive space to step back and consider solutions to wicked problems, or these things that they're always talking about. So I think it's interesting, again, since my background has some sort of art history and symbolic representation, that art is sort of thrown in there as well. So yeah, you should look up moist media. It's kind of interesting, like technoetic arts. Okay, so abstraction, including art, is one of the ways that novel insights and intuition arise. Abstraction distances our understanding from material reality so that we can see or perceive connections and possibilities in unexpected ways. The downside is that it makes us more vulnerable to conspiracy theories. And I'm sure a lot of people out there would just say the things I talk about are conspiracy theories because I'm not proving it scientifically, but they're entitled to think that if they like to throw that word around. It also, I consider myself imaginative. And I think imagination is in short supply. So more imagination, the better. Okay, let's see, conspiracy theories. Okay, the downside is conspiracy theories. It also, to make a key distinction with machine learning, allows humans to break from the path dependency of training data sets. Okay, so it can make leaps. The problem of abduction lies in distinguishing the validity of one intuitive insight from another, of sorting coherent insights from incoherent ones. Abduction makes humans both imaginative and excellent at problem solving through what the EUFG, Snowden and Roncati, 2021, calls the radical repurposing of existing capability for novel use. But we generate a lot of such insights and we get very attached to them even in the face of negative evidence. Determining the validity of which insights are coherent is key to decision making under conditions of uncertainty. Right? So they want to filter out the bunk and find the things that are good and actionable according to whoever's setting the metrics, right? So they want to be able to sort through and decide good, bad, thumbs up, thumbs down. The history of terrorism is littered with examples of someone spotting weak signals early but failing to gain attention. A common question used in post-event analysis is, why didn't we join up the dots? With the benefits of hindsight, a causal chain seems self-evident, and we assume that with better processes, training, etc., it could have been seen in advance. But this is not the case. If we have 4 dots, then there are 6 linkages that can form between the dots and linkages and 64 possible patterns. But if we go up to 10 dots, then the number of possible patterns exceeds 3 trillion. How many dots are there in a human system? So how many possible patterns, right? So bazillions and bazillions. So my thought experiment about the Psychic-Can computer is one pattern among many, many, many. And so in this case, they would want to sort out all the people intuiting different patterns and find out which pattern they feel is the most valid, according to whatever metrics they're setting or whatever actions they anticipate taking under uncertainty, complexity and uncertainty, right? So we are dealing with the proverbial needle in a haystack, and the needle is made of straw. There are simply too many dots/signals for us to pay attention to all of them, so it becomes a matter of luck that someone will see the signal, and then more luck that someone in power will pay attention to what has been seen and even more critically act on it. In a complex world, hindsight does not allow for better foresight. If anything, it makes it worse. So the problem of abduction is to determine which intuitions we should pay attention to, and also how we generate those insights at scale. Because again, this is always about at scale. It's not individuals, it's at a social level. And from multiple perspectives in the moment. Okay, so I want to just emphasize that. The problem of abduction is to determine which intuitions we should pay attention to, and also how we generate those insights at scale and from multiple perspectives in the moment, right? So it's a hunch engine. Like they're looking for a hunch engine, and then they're looking for a way to parse the hunch engine. And that's what I think the Psychic-Can computer is about, is coming up with a way of scaling at a social level an actionable hunch engine. And we're going to read a little bit later in the Stealing Fire book about the unconscious mind and the capability of the unconscious mind to process way more information than the conscious mind. And the mind that's functioning outside of language and linguistics and in signs and symbols, it's much, much faster. So I think this is all very relevant. So we can anticipate that there might be some social movement, right, to get lots of people to participate in pattern recognition. But then the question is, how do you sort it out? And at that point, I think that's what the token engineering is for, the consensus. And when I've talked about like the biofilm and the quorum sensing, that we're all individual sensors out on the margins, and we're saying, it looks like this over here, it feels like this over here, and they're all different. And then coming up with some decision tree that will collapse into, one or a small number of good prospects. And I think that's what this token engineering in spatial computing actually may be about. And so I think, again, the epiphanies, the hunches, the intuitions, at scale, and then sifting through and considering the role of token engineering and wearable technology, particularly, I think wearables under conditions where our brains may be in these altered states of consciousness, either in some sort of therapeutic environment for addiction or depression, or under sleep monitoring, or under drug use or electronic dance floors, or whatever, these places where you might get in there, that they want a wearable on you so that they can track that. Okay, so machine learning may help, but it is inductive in nature, or at least constrained by induction. We need an objective way of determining a coherent from incoherent insights. And I think what Joseph might say, as we were talking about sort of quantum consciousness, is that, like, I think it's collapse. Like, what the coherence is very important, like having things resonating in a coherent manner. So that there is a quest for coherence. That means finding the 17% of people who have seen the gorilla before they talk to the 83% who have not, and also gaining the attention of decision makers for whom the insight seriously may involve considerable risk if it proves to be false. So they want quality information, right? Time is also a significant factor, and the ability to see things from multiple perspectives in real time is one of the key methods outlined later. And this is our second pillar. And I would say this idea of looking at things from many different perspectives, that's kind of like this mixed table decision making that Sean had mentioned with, I believe it's John Rogers, who's the sidekick of Michaela Uluru, is coming up with, hey, we're going to bring together the military industrial complex in Hollywood so we can look at things from all different angles. And so if you imagine, again, it's sort of about qualia, and then having the agents in this, imagine what is it, the Minority Report, where they have the floating 3 precogs in the pool, and they're giving, the actionable intelligence for pre-crime kind of stuff. But I don't think we're all supposed to get in a pool, although there's a lot of emphasis lately on community pools, even in low-income areas. So maybe we're supposed to get in a pool, but they would like for us to be able to get trained and get our mind in a state that we could access these intuitive knowings, and then organize them all, sort them all, vote them all up or down, cascading. And you think about that in the internet, these days, the Reddits and different things, like which ones climb the up to your attention level and which ones get upvoted and downvoted, and then come up with something that they can use. And so I feel like that's actually what's going on, is in linking this to altered states. So that's what I want to read out of this paper, As Through a Looking Glass Darkly, A Complex Systems Approach to Futures by Dave Snowden. And I can include the link to that in the pinned comment. So now I'm going to go over to my Kumu map and talk a little bit about nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Okay, so this is my map. I call it my Artem map. And this was part of kind of like me sort of sorting out. It ended up being a mashup of what the heck happened to my marriage and my life and my family in the context of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and big tobacco and lipids, and then a lot of information linked to the Maniac Netflix TV series, which Steffers turned me onto, and actually seemed to be a highly encoded series that I would encourage folks to check out, with the eye that the maniac part is actually not about a psychological dysfunction, but is the Stan Ulam, I don't know if it was Stan Ulam, it was the other guy, the supercomputer from Los Alamos. And in that TV series, as we're looking at decoding, there's a lot of plant stuff and Cleve Baxter stuff, and it's really fascinating. And most of the people who do the analysis of the Netflix series don't really touch on any of the things that I find interesting. But I was using this map to pull this together. But a key feature besides house plants in the series is smoking. Everybody's smoking. There is a lot of smoke. And early on, Steffers, it was a different series. It was back when we still had that small working group, and there was a discussion of the importance of smoke rings in a different TV show, and the idea of smoke rings and knot theory. And again, Steffers is also highly excellent at abduction. So we were looking at smoke, and if you look at the series, like most people today don't smoke. There's been a profound push to not smoke, and so the fact that you have many, many characters who seem to be chain smokers and prominently featuring the smoke going everywhere in the story, that was sort of a key feature. And so when I was doing my research, I was looking at lipids, which connect in with, I think it's like with the fascia. I'm trying to remember exactly. Like essentially lipids are sort of like the human liquid crystalline part of it, these lipid droplets. And tobacco use affects lipids. And then I started looking into these things called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. And essentially what these receptors do is, so they bind with the nicotine. It's an acetylcholine receptor that binds, receptor polypeptides that respond to the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. And nicotinic receptors respond to drugs such as the agonist nicotine, and they are found in the central and peripheral nervous systems, muscle, and other tissues. And the interesting thing about the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors is the nicotine binds to the receptor, but not only does it bind to it, it actually increases the number of receptors. It grows the receptors, and that's why it's very difficult to stop smoking, because the more you smoke, the more the receptors are there and the more they crave the nicotine. And so it's not just a simple thing of like you're trying to break the habit of the acetylcholine receptors that you already have. If you've been smoking for 20 years, you may have like 100 times the number of those receptors than you used to. And so my take on this, so that's the thing about that you can increase. Nicotine exposure increases these acetylcholine receptors. Now, are acetylcholine receptors all bad? They're not actually all bad. Let's see. Okay, so here's where it talks about them increasing the number of receptor sites. Nicotine from smoking cigarettes increases the number of receptor sites in the brain. So that's that link. Nicotinic receptors impact sensory cognitive function. Okay, so here it says enhance sensory cognitive processing by activation of nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, right? And so what am I talking about? I'm talking about qualia, right? And qualia is sensing, right? Oliver Reiser's The World Sensorium. So how can you increase your sensing? Well, maybe you could have some more, you could get some dosed with some nicotine and get some more of these receptors. So here's the abstract of this paper from 2019 from the Nicotine Tobacco Research publication. And it says activation of nicotinic acetylcholine receptors enhances sensory cognitive function in human subjects and animal models. Yet the neural mechanisms are not fully understood. This review summarizes recent studies on nicotinic regulation of neural processing in the cerebral cortex that point to potential mechanisms underlying enhanced cognitive function. Studies from our laboratory focus on nicotinic regulation of auditory cortex and implications for auditory cognitive processing. But relevant emerging insights from multiple brain regions are discussed. Although the major contributions of the predominant NAACHRS containing some symbol 7 homeric receptors or symbol 4 and some symbol 2 heteromeric subunits are well recognized, recent results point to additional potentially critical contributions from these other subunits that are relatively sparse in the cortex. Ongoing studies aim to elucidate the specific contributions to cognitive and cortical function, right? So here they're saying nicotine can enhance your sensory function. So if you're looking to create a psychic and computer and have really high-level good information processing, you might want to have some more of those receptors, but you would want to manage them, right? You wouldn't just have random people out smoking cartons of cigarettes. You would want it to be treated as a drug, right? A prescription. You would want to have a personalized dose, which is enter vaping, enter patches, enter all of these things. Now, you're not supposed to smoke because the smoking will hurt your lungs, but then that's too random. Like we can't measure cigarettes, they're not standardized, but we can standardize nicotine delivery in these other devices. And if you go back, the British American Tobacco Company back in like 57 yeah, in 1959, between 1959 and 1967, uh, the British American Tobacco hired Battelle out of Ohio, with running the Department of Energy labs, to develop electronic cigarettes, right? Oh, 1962 to 67, sorry. So they've had this for a really long time, right here, the Battelle Memorial Institute in Geneva, Switzerland. Geneva, so we're back to Jungian archetypes. So British American Tobacco acquired R.J. Reynolds in 2017. But these e-cigarettes, they've been around since well, actually, no, here it says 1959. The early stuff is 1959. So 1959, they've been working on e-cigarettes. Now they're going to be able to do this delivery to enhance your sensory processing. Okay, so here is a paper about, this is from 2020, and it says, do nicotinic receptors modulate higher order cognitive processing? Highlights from the paper. The contributions of NACHRS oligomers to higher order cognitive processing have been investigated using genetically modified mice, which revealed, among other findings, that these subunits modulate sleep and anesthesia, so the unconscious mind, as well as several higher order cognitive functions. Sleep stuff is really important, and the dream stuff is super important. Human genetic studies have identified variants in these receptors that predispose individuals to neuropsychiatric diseases such as schizophrenia. So in this Maniac TV show, one of the main characters has a psychotic break. And there's a whole other thing that we can talk about lipids and problems with microtubules and quantum psychiatry and what keeps you grounded in reality. But right now we're just going to stick with these acetylcholine receptors, right? So here is another paper. This is from 2017, the sleep-wake cycle in the nicotinic alpha-9 acetylcholine receptor subunit knockout mice. And so it's talking about that these are involved in physiological processes in sensory, endocrine, and immune systems. There's a relationship between the architecture of this, body homeostasis, and sensory afference, so that the disruption of afferent signaling is expected to affect the temporal organization of sleep and wake states. So it does work around REM sleep. Let's see, consolidated diurnal NREM sleep contributed to obtain higher values of NREM sleep delta EEG activity among knockout mice during the rest phase. So I think essentially it enhances REM sleep, and that's where you process your learning, is in those spaces. So again, if we're working in archetypal dreaming, here, acetylcholine and metacognition during sleep. This is another paper from 2023, so recent. Acetylcholine and metacognition during sleep. Acetylcholine is, and again, remember they're the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, but this is the acetylcholine part. A neurotransmitter and neuromodulator involved in a variety of cognitive functions. It is involved in the regulation of REM sleep. Cholinergic neurons in the brainstem and basal forebrain project to and innervate wide areas of the cerebral cortex and reciprocally interact with other neuromodulatory systems to produce the sleep-wake cycle and different sleep stages. And so again, I was talking about that OA, the second season, and the first episode of the second season, where they've like screened all of these women to be in this warehouse under, I think it was actually a sugar thing, Emily. I know Emily has done work on sugar, and they're in this like abandoned sugar warehouse, and they're on cots, and they're sleeping in rows. It's like maybe 50 women around this pier, and then they have human transcribers transcribing all the notes from their dreams and tracking every dream cycle. Like, I don't know how many you have, 5, 7 per night, and transcribing all of the notes. So when I say like psychic hand computer, it seems sort of like that. So this is the stuff about the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors that I think is pretty interesting to think about. And again, hat tip to Steffers for her early insights into smoke rings and turning me on to this Maniac TV series with lots and lots of smoking, because it did ultimately interface with my personal history having gone to university in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is the home, what was the headquarters of R.J. Reynolds Tobacco. So I have a lot more that I could say about R.J. Reynolds Tobacco, but we're just going to put a lid on it for today. So if you're like, oh, let me tell you what, the snake venom guy thinks about nicotine and spike proteins or whatever. Well, I mean, that's a thing, but who else is talking about the REM sleep and sensory enhancement and learning integration, right? And how that might relate to my thought experiment. So now I am going to go, I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to pull up Melanie Swan's 2016 paper about cloud minds and renting your unused brainwave cycles during sleep. And I'm going to read a little bit about that, and we're going to continue with our abductive enterprise. Okay, so here we go with the Melanie Swan paper. And this is a goodie. If you haven't read this one, I can link to this one too. The Journal of Evolution and Technology from October of 2016. So, this is about 8 years old, by Melanie Swan, who at the time it says New School University in New York, but I think now she's in England. Okay, so I'll read the abstract and then I'm going to read the stuff about the sleep cycles. The aim of this paper is to explore the development of brain-computer interfacing and cloud minds as possible future scenarios. I describe potential applications such as selling unused brain processing cycles and the blockchaining of personality functions. The possibility of ubiquitous brain-computer interfaces that are continuously connected to the internet suggests interesting options for our future selves. Questions about what it is to be human, the nature of our current existence, and interaction with reality, and how things might be different could become more prominent. I examined speculative future scenarios such as digital selves and cloud mind collaborations. Applications could be adopted in tiers of advancing complexity and risk, starting with health tracking. Who better to introduce wellness blockchain health tracking than Camelot, Bitcoin guy, right? With the Kennedy legacy. Okay. Yeah. So wellness. And then it says, by linking, first starting with the health tracking, followed by information seeking and entertainment, and finally self-actualization, that would be Maslow. By linking brains to the internet, brain-computer interfaces could allow individuals to be more highly connectable, not just to communication networks, the ant computer, but also to other minds, and thus could enable participation in new kinds of collective applications such as a cloud mind. And I guess I got a little bit, like when I was frustrated the other day about the book list, is like my view of the world and the elephant, which is ultimately qualia, right, is based on so much more than just books, right? It's my lived experience, it's white papers I've read, it's maps I've made, it's videos I've watched, it's ideas I've had being out in the world. Like, I could give you a list of 20 books, but your inner space with those books, because you're not me, is going to be something totally different, right? And so this qualia, and I even think about like Qualcomm, being so prominent in San Diego and part of all of this Internet of Everything, that ultimately it is about qualia. And I can't trade the qualia, but I think this thing sort of imagines like, oh, you could just keep a digital twin of yourself on the decentralized interwebs and someone could pop into your brain and look around. And while on the one hand, it would be really cool to actually instantly have another group of people, like a group of people that I sync with, who I have similar values, kind of all be on the same page and have access to all the same information, I wouldn't want to make a digital twin of me that you could pop in and look out of my eyes. Like, that feels really creepy. But that's the kind of stuff that Melanie Swan is talking about with these blockchain minds and the blockchain digital health twins. So just think about that, right? Like, I'm asking you, when these inquiries are made, I'm not just trying to be a hard ass about it and say like, no, I don't want to make you a book list. It's that you have to do your work because it's embodied in your lived experience. And so the work I've done, it can overlap with your experience, but it's never going to be the same. And I don't think we should want for it to be the same. I don't want you to, like, I think I labeled it like, don't think like me, because I don't want you to think like me. I would like for you to think alongside me, right? And then alongside me close enough that we can kind of look over each other's shoulders and go, oh, like among the things that you're interested in, that's the thing that I'm interested in. And this gives me this is a tool or a perspective or lens that I can look at what I have over here in a new way or consider different options. And so it's the alongside part, not the like part. So anyway, that's just continuing on yesterday's video. Okay, so a cloud mind or crowd mind is the concept of multiple individual minds, human or machine, joined together to pursue a collaborative goal such as problem solving, idea generation, creative expression, or entertainment. The prospect of cloud minds raises questions about individual versus collective personhood. Some of the necessary conditions for individuals to feel comfortable in joining cloud mind include privacy, security, reversibility, retention of personal identity, and blockchain technology might be employed to orchestrate the security, automation, coordination, and credit assignation requirements of cloud mind automations. And so really, all these people out there, it's like, it's not the tool, it's how you use it. Like, have they read this paper? Do they know where it's going? Because this is big, right? This is really big. So in thinking about the acetylcholine receptors, I'm going to jump over to this short paragraph on page 64. Section 3.2, Cloud Mind Starter Application. Sell unused brain processing cycles to the cloud. Okay. In the future, cloud minds involving human brain power might be facilitated by brain-computer interfaces or other ways of linking human cognitive processing to the internet. Now, my feeling is that we probably already have a telepathic psychic capability, but we just forgot what we lost the instruction manual. And some people can do it, and maybe some people are more easily able to access that because of how their operating system works. But I think as much as the engineered technology are going to be the training wheels, and who knows the time scale on this, if this is several generations out, but the goal would be just that we operate with mental telepathy rather than using the implant or the carbon nano machines or what have you. The key feature is the live 24/7 connection, not just generally to the internet, but specifically to other brains and machine thinkers. And again, this will be like your personal assistant, right? Tapping into Jane, like Orson Scott Card's Jane in your ear. One way that individuals might start to explore and adopt BCI CloudMind applications is in a starter application idea of selling permissioned brain cycles to the cloud. This is a parallel concept to selling self-generated electricity from solar panels back to the power grid. And so when my thought experiment is that it's this massive parallel processing of like our psychic, our collective subconscious capacity into the internet, that's pretty much what she's saying there. She's just laying it out. This initial and basic CloudMind application might involve the sharing of unused brain processing cycles. The structure could be time sharing, cognitive processing power during sleep cycles or other downtime. Now, your sleep isn't downtime. Your body's busy doing stuff while you're sleeping. Important stuff. Conceptually similar to participating in community computing projects like SETI at home or protein folding at home. The idea would be to securely and unobtrusively share one's own unused resources, downtime brain cycles. There could be diverse compensation models for this, including remuneration and donation. So, the last time when I was reading on the domestic front with the smart toaster and saying, the Bitcoin people want to use the unused toaster cycles to, mine their crypto, that's their imagination. Now we're the toaster, And I think they really want the sleep cycle because, as we'll read next from Stealing Fire, it is the unconscious mind that actually works or a mind in flow state that works way faster than our conscious mind that is limited by our ego and all of the naggy little things that we have going on with the ego. So I'm gonna pause and we'll read a little bit from Stealing Fire next. Okay. For all these looking for book recommendations, I would say this is a very accessible one you can start with if you haven't already started. It is a national bestseller. I am not necessarily condoning this book or endorsing the things in this book, but it explains to you where things are headed. And so it's a good guide it's a guide to what is planned. It was published in 2017. Again, it's by Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel. Jamie Wheel is out there. He's often connected with the Game B folks. The subtitle is, so it's Stealing Fire, How Silicon Valley, the Navy SEALs, and Maverick Scientists Are Revolutionizing the Way We Live and Work. All right. And so I also have the audiobook for this. I read it and I marked it all up so you can see. I was thinking about doing a read aloud of the whole thing, but I don't know. I probably would get caught on copyright on this. But this is from, let's see, what chapter? Chapter 2. And the section is on richness. So I'm going to just read these 2.5 pages. Okay, richness. The final characteristics of ecstasis, now ecstasis is a concept that's really important going back to classical antiquity, is richness. A reference to the vivid, detailed, and revealing nature of non-ordinary states. In his first video, You Are a Receiver, Silva explains it like this. It is creative inspiration or divine madness or that kind of connection to something larger than ourselves that make us feel like we understood the intelligence that runs throughout the universe. The Greeks call that sudden understanding anamnesis, literally the forgetting of the forgetting. A powerful sense of remembering. 19th century psychologist William James experienced this during his Harvard experiments with nitrous oxide and mescaline, noting, it's the extremely frequent phenomenon, that sudden feeling which sometimes sweeps over us of having been here before, as if at some indefinite past time in just this place we were already saying just these things. And that feeling of waking up into some ineffable truth that's been in us all along can feel deeply significant. In non-ordinary states, the information we receive can be so novel and intense that it feels like it's coming from a source outside ourselves. But by breaking down what's going on in the brain, we start to see that what feels supernatural might just be supernatural, beyond our normal experience for sure, but not beyond our actual capabilities. Often, an ecstatic experience begins when the brain releases norepinephrine and dopamine into our system. These neurochemicals raise heart rates, tighten focus, and help us sit up and pay attention. We notice more of what's going on around us, so information normally tuned out or ignored becomes more readily available. And besides simply increasing focus, these chemicals amp up the brain's pattern recognition abilities. Pattern recognition, right? That's abduction, helping us find new links between all of this incoming information. And I will also mention in Maniac, the focus is sort of on somebody, again, with a psychotic break. And so there's a lot of interest in schizophrenia, which is also sometimes aligns with apophenia and pattern recognition. So I think that pattern recognition is important. And that's also in the portable doors, the pattern recognition. As these changes are taking place, our brainwaves slow from agitated beta to calmer alpha, shifting us into daydreaming mode, relaxed, alert, and able to flit from idea to idea without as much internal resistance. And then parts of the prefrontal cortex begin shutting down. We experience the selflessness, timelessness, and effortlessness of transient hypofrontality. This quiets the already know that, move along voice of our inner critic and dampens the distractions of the past and the future. All of these changes knock out filters we normally apply to incoming data, giving us access to fresh perspectives and more potential combinations of ideas. And I would say just for me, lately I've been doing a lot of digging in my yard and lifting up sod and getting garden beds ready. And it is this daydreamy kind of mode. And, you know, I just want to uplift, I said it in yesterday's video, but I do think the idea, I mean, clearly Nicole Shanahan is all about the soil, and she's got a whole cadre of people that are all about the soil. And, you know, Bobby's treatment centers, right, for addiction and mental health, they're interested in getting people in these normal states of consciousness, including uses of psychedelic drugs for addiction, and getting them doing permaculture. So I think that there must be something in connecting to the soil, and I don't know if it's mineral consciousness, if it's microbial consciousness, if it's electromagnetism, it could be or all of those things. But I think there is something about being in tune with that opens you up to having these epiphany kinds of idea connecting experiences. And again, nothing as big as like, oh, you know, I have an imaginary friend and they told me this while I was digging in the dirt. It's more like an intuition. And, you know, what I said was having that image of the little boy with the phone on the pile of dirt and knowing that Leo was doing that research with the crop insurance, the parametric crop insurance, but most of those were small holding farmers, like farmers, you know, in the global South who are working, you know, 3 to 10 acres of land. These were not massive industrial farming operations. And so in those circumstances, and then we've got all of the Web3 connected to the food forests, which is another complex system. And so I think there is something about the complexity, the complex energy flows in those systems, those economic systems that's connected back to the Odoms, that is part of this communication. So being on soil is almost like improving our capability, like optimizing us as receivers of information. So I want to point that out, the flow state. And that's why like me giving you a book list isn't going to do it, because I'd have to say, okay, well, to be like me, you'd have to eat these things and dig as much as I dig, you know, have been digging the past month, and collecting these rocks and putting them in a bucket and carrying them around. And like there would be a whole thing for you to actually be an embodied intelligence like me, because my intelligence lives in my body, and the things I'm doing with my body are different from the things you're doing in your body. And I will say, so today I was actually listening to this in my car, and I met someone who offers a class in NIA, and I can't remember what NIA is, the name. It's something neuromodulation, interactive something, but essentially it's a movement class. It's like an hour where you do sort of intentional movements and stretches, and it has music. And, you know, I need to get more in my body than in my head, or balance it out. And but I'm also body conscious, and I'm not really coordinated. So dancing isn't really good for me, and I'm not really team sport oriented. And so this is it in Hot Spring Village, where there's a lot of retirees. So there's like absolutely no body competition, or no one's there judging how, like, if you're doing the movements right. And it was great. It was actually super great. And so I think there is something to this embodied intelligence that's really central, but embodied intelligence in a particular context. And then I think there is an interest in the context of getting us maybe on soil, although also maybe on water, because I'm going to talk about seasteading in a minute. Okay, so as we move even deeper into ecstasis, the brain can release endorphins and anandamide. They both decrease pain, removing the diversion of physical distress from the equation, letting us pay even more attention to what is going on. Anandamide also plays another important role, boosting lateral thinking, which is this abduction stuff that I keep talking about, rhizomatic thinking, which is our ability to make far-flung connections between disparate ideas. Post-its, Slinky, Silly Putty, Superglue, and a host of other breakthroughs all came when an inventor made a sideways leap, applying an overlooked tool in a novel way. In part, that's anandamide at work. And if we go really deep, our brain waves shift once again, pushing us towards quasi-hypnotic theta, a wave we normally produce only during REM sleep that enhances relaxation and intuition. To wrap it all up, we can experience an afterglow of serotonin and oxytocin, prompting feelings of peace, well-being, trust, and sociability as we start to integrate the information that has just been revealed. And revealed is the right word. Conscious processing can only handle about 120 bits of information at once. This isn't much. Listening to another person speak can take almost 60 bits. If 2 people are talking, that's it. We have maxed out our bandwidth. But if we remember that our unconscious processing can handle billions of bits at once, we don't need to search outside ourselves to find a credible source for all of that miraculous insight. So they're saying the unconscious processing can do billions as opposed to 120. So you can imagine why there's this huge push to get us into our subconscious through all the different ways that are described in this book, including kids who are more imaginative than grown-ups. So that's important to understand. When I say stuff like we're going to hit Moore's law and we're not going to like get to the other side without it being a biohybrid system, because the machines can only do so many things and they can't do the human things. So all of the nonsense that Elon Musk said the AI is going to wake up and destroy all the people, or they're going to kill all of us, is ridiculous, because we're actually it's It's a holobiont. It's an interactive system that is cycling between human intuition and pattern seeking and machine learning processing and sorting. And then somehow those exchanges are happening through the token coordination on blockchain. So Umwelt is the technical term for the sliver of the data stream that we normally apprehend. It is the reality our senses can perceive. And all the Umwelts are not the same, right? That's what I was saying. My Umwelt is not your Umwelt, and that's good. But it would be cool if we could find some common workspace without it being a cloud mind, right? That we could compare notes. And that's what I continue to seek with relatively limited progress in that area. But that's, if I'm here to kind of kick your butt and say, do your own work, think your own thoughts, do your stuff. It's not because I'm talking down to you or I think I'm better than you. I'm actually like the Mr. Curtis teacher who has high expectations because I know you could do it if you want to. And if you don't want to, fine. And then you don't have to be here watching this channel. And I'm not going to chase you down and go, nah, you're a bad person for not doing it. It's whatever you want to do. But if you want to be here, then be in your Umwelt, right? And let's share ideas across, but have them be your ideas. I mean, even though these are not exactly but your synthesis of things that are your connections you're making in your worlds, as opposed to just sharing some other influencer's thing to tell you how to think. Because I'm interested in broader concepts, not just I've got an answer and here it is. Okay. So Umwelt is the technical term for the sliver of data stream that we normally apprehend. It is the reality our senses can perceive. And all Umwelts are not the same. Dogs hear whistles we cannot. Sharks detect electromagnetic pulses. Bees see ultraviolet light while we remain oblivious. It is the same physical world, the same bits and bytes, just different perception and processing. But the cascade of neurobiological change that occurs in a non-ordinary state lets us perceive and process more of what is going on around us with greater accuracy. In these states, we get upstream of our Umwelt. We get access to increased data, heightened perception, and amplified connection. And this lets us see ecstasis for what it actually is, an information technology. Big data for our minds. Okay, so next, I'm going to go back to that page with John Boyk, the Cognar guy, about community currency, because when he's talking about cascading reactions, I believe that this is the extended reality between the human Umwelt and the subconscious with the machine learning well, I don't know that the machine is finding the patterns, but it's parsing, right? Maybe it's part of this keeping the ledger of the tokens for the biofilm quorum sensing. And that's what the community currencies are for. And then when we close out with Patri Friedman, the grandson of Milton Friedman, the free market libertarian guy, right? He's doing, he's been working for a long time in Seasteading with Peter Thiel, with the backing of Peter Thiel at Palantir, this idea that they're going to create essentially charter cities floating on the water that are outside of different jurisdictions. And you could almost imagine those as giant biological server farms, REM sleep-based nicotinic acetylcholine receptor microdosed server farms with probably some sort of, machine learning processor that's coordinating, conducting all of the epiphanies that we're capturing from the field. So let me move over to Lida and Cognar. Okay, so I was catching up with my friend Lynn Davenport last night, and bummer, the open education resource legislation passed. But I want to give her and her colleagues, Mary, among others, great props for really keeping their feet to the fire and ultimately making them pretend that open education resources are printed out PDF documents, which they definitely are not. But we're going to just see where this goes next. So while we were talking, I was just curious about Texas and community currency. And so I just kind of put in a quick search, and this came up, which I thought was quite interesting. It's from something called Pi, P-Y, Texas. And Pi stands for Python, the computer coding system. And it looks like it was maybe a conference in 2014. And so one of the presentations was by John Boyk. And I've mentioned, I did a whole talk about John Boyk and his idea about this cognar, and I can link to that, this cognar, cognitive narrative structure with the active inference folks. But evidently he's been connected to them since 2014, which I didn't realize that the active inference went back that far. But the presentation that he was making is called Modeling Dollar and Community Currency Flows in a Virtual U.S. County Using Python. It's a beginner level, and it was October 5th, 2014. So I'm just going to read the description of this talk. It says, John Boyk is the author of the new book, Economic Direct Democracy. Right there, we're back fixing democracy again, right? A framework to end poverty, that would be social impact, and maximize well-being. That would be health wearables. John will delve into his Python-based simulation model of flows. And again, all this ecstasis stuff is about the flow state. So I think there could be ecstasis within individual agents and then networked groups of agents, the cascading flows in the decision trees. He gives background on the proposed community currency called the token in a virtual U.S. county. So again, 2014 is pretty early to be talking about tokenized community currencies publicly. Like the blockchain stuff and token engineering wasn't something that was really broadly on the scene. I mean, 2014 seems pretty early to me. Okay, so he gives background on the proposed community currency system called the token exchange system, explores how the model is structured, presents modeling results, and discusses potential social impact as guided and informed. I'm sorry, let me just say that again. He gives background on the proposed community currency system called the token exchange system, explores how the model is structured, presents modeling results, and discusses potential social impact as guided and informed his book's thesis. I guess it's kind of an awkward sentence. As a hint of scale and potential impact, annual currency flows in the simulation model are measured in the billions. A global partnership of interested academics, civil society, and government, business, and philanthropy groups is now forming to move the book's proposal forward. And then they have the background of the project is called the Principled Societies Project. And so I just want to point out that I've been talking for a long time about the whole, why are we only talking about CBDCs, but we're not talking about community currencies? Because community currencies is the planned manufactured solution, and it's what they want. Because the community is the holon, is the tissue or the organ of this emergent superorganism. It's how the information is going to be organized by community at the community level. And Bernard Lietaer had been working on this for forever. It's going to be dollars, and it's meant to be an add-on. And I can see this connecting into the community banking system. And again, that's something that Jason was very aware of. But I think at the time, many people who were involved in it early on had no idea that how it was going to be connected to social impact, how the social impact would be connected to socio-technical cybernetics and optimization grids and fitness landscapes and global hedge fund bets. Like, people didn't know that. They just hear, oh, we're taking our money away and we're putting in the community and we're investing in the things we care about, like Eisenstein's sacred economics. But they don't know about the sensors in the kids' shoes, right? Or, they don't know the nuance of it. They're selling a good story about what these community currencies are. And I think it goes back to Bancor. And that's why, Galia Benartzi and, the Bretton Woods 75 anniversary that Charles Eisenstein attended, along with many of the central bankers, there's really no separation. It is a flow state managing information coordination among social systems for this abduction, then I believe. So I'm gonna just move over and talk a little bit about something called LIDA, which is his program in the Principled Society. Okay, so the Principled Society project that he was involved with 10 years ago, it's called the LIDA. It looks like LIDA, LEDDA. I guess you could maybe say LEDA, but LEDA, so if you take one of the D's away, is mythological. It's Leda and the Swan. And Leda was the queen of Sparta, and she was raped by Zeus in the form of a swan. And that night she also slept with her husband, the king of Sparta. And then she had 2 sets of twins from those double engagements, sometimes depicted in art as coming out of eggs. And one, it was Helen of Troy and I guess Clytemnestra, and then Castor and Pollux. So you've got 2 sets of twins, and we're dealing with simulation modeling. So isn't that interesting? So this local economic direct democracy association, when I'm saying the tokens are not just money, they're also votes. And they're not just money and votes, but they're the signals, the coordinating signals for these complex systems. So he describes LIDA in its early stage of development as a prototype social cognitive architecture, right? And again, we could say the global brain. I think that actually the fascia is more relevant because it's decentralized than the brain, which is centralized, but it's a cognitive architecture. It's a coordinated distributed intelligence. It has 8 components: a token monetary system, a crowd-based financial system, a local market that organizes, in which organizations compete and cooperate to provide goods and services, including principal businesses, those would be the benefit corporations, a property right system that assigns ownership and use rights for physical, intellectual, and other types of property, right? And so those are the smart contracts. And then this is where we are running into the circular economy and that phrase that I hate, but I mean, I guess in this case it's relevant. You will own nothing and be happy. I don't know that you will own nothing, but certain things will be accessed through tokens. And that's the Georgist principle. An incentive system that encourages cooperative or desirable behavior. Again, so that's the game mechanics tied to the cybernetics and the UN SDGs. A governance system that regulates all of these components, and that would be the protocol layer, Web3 protocol layer on blockchain, formal and informal models. So the computer models would describe how it functions and do forecasting. And hold that thought for a minute. I just want to pull up another book that I have started. Sorry, I've got many books underway. I had seen this one before, and Steffers brought it to my attention again, and so I ended up buying a copy. It's called The Cybernetic Revolutionaries, Technology and Politics in Allende's Chile by Eden Medina, and this is out of MIT Press, and it was published in 2011, right? So a couple years before this. So this is about cybersyn, where Stafford Beer, the English cybernetician who studied under Norbert Wiener, where he was essentially proposing something like LIDA in terms of like a democratic socialism. And so, and then it says it will help communities focus and solve their problems. And I'm sure that that would be linked to impact metrics. So so LIDA is today's cybersyn. And I don't know how far along it is, but clearly they've got everybody on board: governments, philanthropies, corporate America, all of the stuff is going. And they talk about economic democracy that uses money as a bona fide voting tool. And again, we often say, like, put your money where your values are, right? And that's exactly how they're going to overlay that. But it's a signal coordinating thing for the superorganism. And it's talking about having, solving poverty with this cybernetic system. And again, it sounds good. It sounds good if you don't really know about, like, if you're fine putting your toddler in a Head Start on a surveillance play table with sensors in their slippers, right? But in my opinion, beyond a signaling for the emergent superorganism, I think it's about divination. The signal is about this abduction, is pulling epiphanies from this ecstatic state, these other states collectively, and then sorting them out. So that is the Boyk stuff connected. And again, the community, that presentation was happening in Texas 10 years ago. So I'm just going to close out a little at the end with Patri Friedman. Someone sent me a link to a talk he did recently in Singapore with the network state folks. Okay, so I mean, we all know about Milton Friedman, right? And Patri is his grandson. I guess he spent used to work at Google, and I guess he's an angel investor, and he's invested in Palantir and Matterport, and he founded the Seasteading Institute and Future Cities. And so he's working on charter cities that float in the water, right? And so they're setting up their own governance systems, right, which would be through these tokens. You can imagine a LIDA on a seasteading venture. And one of my early run-ins over blockchain with the John Bush, Derek Bros crowd was with John Bush. Like, I saw John Bush interviewing Patri Friedman, and I'm like, what? What do you, so the freedom cells, right? Freedom cells combined with Seasteading, combined with Palantir and Peter Thiel. Like, who could imagine, right? It's, so this is his bio for a company, Pronomos Venture Capital. And there's a lot of people involved. I was scrolling through, but I did think that it was interesting that Balaji Srinivasan of the Network State is an advisor to this Pronomos project. So the network state is really important, because the network is, I think, the state literally, well, I mean, there's the state in terms of an electrical engineering or physics standpoint, but then there's also the state as a democratic, like a governance structure, which you can start to see where the electrical engineering and the governance structures and the cybernetics and the tokens and the logic gates and the smart contracts are all going to come together, and these fitness landscapes. So the last thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to show. Let's see. Yeah. So this is from my descent map, and I made this a long time ago. And this section is up next to Jim Rutt and his Game Beat folks, and it's talking about the network state, which got some attention for a while, the Balaji Srinivasan book. And, I can link to this map, and there's a PDF of it, so you can read it if you want. It's interesting that we've got Bitcoin, right? So Bobby would be totally in alignment with that. And then you've got the yin yang, and you've got the Da Vinci, man in the circle square. And for me, when I made this map, I was trying to sort of do an infographic of how I thought that this would work. And so I linked, Srinivasan proposes something called a ledger of record of macro history, which would be cryptographically recorded history, right? And so this would come under, all the folks who are like, don't erase, we want freedom of thought, and we don't want censorship, and we want freedom of the press. And so, somebody like Srinivasan would say, I have the answer, it's blockchain. We'll put all of the history on blockchain so that no one can question it. We can't disappear history. It'll all be there. But ultimately the network state, I forgot, actually. Okay, I forgot to read this section. I had my list, and this one I left off. So I think that the ledger in the blockchain is about running the processing. And okay, so I'll do this after the map. So a ledger of record, keeping track of all of the outcomes of all of the states of play. And then we have Robin Hanson, again, libertarian, free markets, with the idea of futarchy, that you vote values and bet beliefs. And so these are these betting markets. And the betting markets links to the bacterial quorum sensing with the biofilms, and then sorting out among all of the intuitive ideas and patterns that you see, which are the best ones, which are the actionable ones. And so that's done through the tokens, and then it's sifted through the protocol layer of the smart contracts. And then I foresee a time in which the cybernetics, which is again, the cybersyn in Chile, the cybernetic revolutionaries, that there will be a fitness landscape that optimizes for certain outcomes at both individual and social levels. And so then based on the information that gets fed back in, and then that's a second order cybernetics, and then you go for the next round. So it's a cycle. And then the cycle is meant to, I think, underpin emergent behavior and this human potential. Although I don't think that we would necessarily agree to play this game, and that I don't know who's setting the key performance indicators. But in going around in the optimization, it may also be that our distributed intelligence that maybe starts to become telepathic with these BCIs as training wheels, and our, precision nicotine dosing and our microdosing of psychedelics that are printed on our home printers, like the time they talk about in Stealing Fire, that we become like an autopoietic organism like these cloud minds. Like a cloud mind might become its own self-organizing system under this autopoiesis. And again, Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, they were the ones promoting autopoiesis, and they were also from Chile. So it's like we're kind of building the ant computer with our consciousness, and our consciousness is embodied, and it has the body and then the soul connection. So for the very end, I'm going to read, this is from Children of Time. This is part of this fictional trilogy by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and it's where the nano altered spiders tame the ants on this planet and use them for processing. And so in this chapter, there's like a disease, a plague, and they're supposed to try to figure out how to resolve it, right? So they need some sort of processing system, and they're using the ants to do that. Okay, so let me just figure out where. Okay, so Portia is a spider. There is another great advance that Portia's society is built on, and yet one that has become a serious limiter of their further advancement. There are hundreds of tamed ant colonies within Great Nest. That's the ant computer. Not counting those in the surrounds that undertake the day-to-day business of producing food, clearing ground, or fending off incursions of wild species. Each colony has been carefully trained by subtle manipulation of punishment, reward, and chemical stimulus. Okay, so this is the LIDA tokens. So the colonies, these different ant colonies, have been trained with subtle manipulative game mechanics, that's in the protocol layer, to perform certain tasks, giving the great minds of the spiders access to a curious kind of analytical engine, using the cascading decision trees of the colony's own governance as gearing. That's Alita, right? And if you imagine the colonies being like Patrick Friedman's Seasteading programs that John Bush was promoting. And is that a freedom cell, right? Are the freedom cells the ant computer? And does it matter, I guess, if you agree to be in the ant computer? I don't know. Maybe you're happy being in Derek's ant computer. But do you know that's what it is? And would it change your perception if you knew? Okay. Each colony is very good for a very limited set of related calculations. Vastly skilled, yet vastly specialized idiot savant. And retraining a community of ants is a long and painstaking task. So I guess that's why they're saying they're limited, is that the ants can be trained, but then there's not a lot of other stuff that can be done. So I would say we're better than ants because we have access to the field and the epiphany engine, right? So I'll just close with this is here is the Network State Conference 2024. It's interesting because this channel only has 65 subscribers. It was from a month ago at the Suntech Singapore Convention and Exhibition Center. This is where Patrick Friedman is here on the left and the interviewer, and the network state is Srinivas. So is the network state the psychic ant computer? And, all points seem to continue to point in the direction that is a solid possibility. So think about that, and think about your qualia. Definitely some various books. If you're taking notes, Children of Time, Adrian Tchaikovsky, Cybernetic Revolutionaries, Eden Medina, Stealing Fire, Stephen Kotler, and Jamie Wheel. Those are the ones I've got for you today, and take them or leave them. Nobody's keeping track. There's no grade. Enjoy the rest of your day, folks. Bye-bye.